Welcome to TV Africa News and thank you for always joining us. This is Africa Today. My name is Najuma Lima, but first are the headlines. We shall not resign, the NSSF bosses cough at Parliament. Rebuilding schools, hospitals, top priority in Tigray charity group says. Pro cyclist teams up with girls cycling club to promote the sport in Cape Town tour. Welcome once again. Now the news in detail. The acting NSSF Managing Director Patrick Ayota has said, despite recommendation by Parliament that he and other top NSSF officials resign from their positions, they will not do so for now. He was responding to a question in regards to the recommendation by Parliament owing to an investigation by Parliament. We have more. The Select Committee of Parliament tasked to investigate alleged abuse of office, corruption and mismanagement of the National Social Security Fund has recommended the stepping aside of former Managing Director Richard Byarugaba and Deputy Managing Director Patrick Ayota to step aside to pave way for investigation by IGG. The report was consequently adopted by Parliament after debate last week. Addressing journalists on Monday, the acting Managing Director said whereas Parliament made recommendations, they are only advisory and the financial decision rests with the executive. In their first address to the media and the public at large since the release of the report by Parliament that found NSSF officials culpable for roles played in the abuse of office, corruption and mismanagement of the fund, the NSSF officials said there was no evidence to prove any mismanagement of funds. The NSSF board chairperson Dr. Peter Chimboa explained that the alleged shilling 6 billion was only planned for, but no cash was ever released. Rebuilding schools and hospitals is the number one priority in Ethiopia's northern Tigray region after 2 years of brutal conflict. Let's take a look.
According to US-based charity Save the Children, for months since the federal government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front signed a peace deal, the situation remains dire. Janti Serapito, President and Chief Executive Officer of Save the Children US, said this after a trip to the region, which remained largely cut off from the world during the fighting marked by numerous atrocities that spilled over into neighboring Afar and Amhara regions. The brutal civil war in northern Ethiopia may have killed as many as 600,000 people, making it one of the world's deadliest conflicts of recent times. Between June and October 2022 alone, almost 200 children under the age of 5 died of starvation in 14 hospitals across the Tigray region, according to data collected by local doctors and researchers. There were several more casualties of the conflict, including millions of displaced people.
At least 15 people have been killed in Malawi and Mozambique as Cyclone Freddy battered the region for the second time in a month. Torrential rain caused flooding and mudslides as it made landfall in Mozambique on Saturday night before hitting neighboring Malawi on Sunday. Meteorologists say the looping pattern, which has seen Freddy strike southern Africa twice, is extremely rare. NGOs working in the region say the rain and high winds have caused a lot of destruction, with trees falling down, roofs blown off and buildings and homes damaged. But with communications and electricity supply in the storm area still down, the full extent of the damage and the number of casualties is not yet clear. The United Nations says, however, that more than 500,000 people are at a risk of being affected in Mozambique this time around. Freddy is on track to become the longest cyclone on record by meteorologists. Forecasters say the cyclone is expected to leave Mozambique during the week and weekend. Let's take a quick break. We shall be right back. Welcome back. You're still watching TV Africa News, the right to know. Tunisian members of parliament convened on Monday after a 2-year hiatus. The new assembly was elected by about 11% in both rounds of registered voters. We have more.
These new dispositions as a result of reforms spearheaded by President Kais Saied, who was elected in late 2019. On October 25th of July 2021, Saied took on full executive power, sacked the Prime Minister and dissolved the parliament. On the 30th of March 2022, he hailed a historic moment when announcing the dissolution of the Assembly of Representatives of the People to preserve the state and its institutions and the Tunisian people. Recht Ghannouchi, the Speaker of the suspended Ennahda-dominated parliament, was then accused of having plotted against state security. Since then, he has been investigated on multiple charges including incitement and money laundering, denying all of them. In April 2022, he deplored the state of the nation's democracy.
As extremist violence in West Africa's Sahel region spreads south towards coastal states, the United States military has launched its annual military training exercise aimed at helping armies contain the jihadist threat. Soldiers from several African countries are being trained in counterinsurgency tactics as part of the annual U.S.-led exercise known as Flintlock that began this week. Some 1,300 military personnel from 29 countries are training in Ghana and Ivory Coast amid surging jihadist violence linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State group that killed thousands, displaced millions, and plunged countries into crisis. While most of the extremist activity is concentrated in West Africa's inland Sahel region in Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger, the violence is rapidly spreading to coastal states like Ghana, which is experiencing an upsurge in attacks by unidentified groups which could have links to jihadists. Northern Ghana had just one violent incident connected to an unidentified armed group in 2021, but that figure rose dramatically to 19 in 2022 according to the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project. This year's U.S. Flintlock, a 2-week event, is taking place amid growing anti-French sentiment in West Africa. In our business news today, South Africa's largest public sector workers' union continued to protest outside various hospitals across the country on Monday. The protest, including union members in health and education, has run into its second week with heavy law enforcement on display to monitor the rallies.
The National Education, Health and Allied Workers Union is demanding a 10% wage increase, while the government has offered 4.7%. Protesters have vowed to intensify their action until their demands are met. Members of the South African Defence Force were also deployed to the Thelemogren Regional Hospital in Vaslui in the east of Johannesburg. According to the military, medical personnel were deployed to several public hospitals to mitigate the consequences of a strike that the government says he caused several deaths. South African Health Minister Joe Fala said at least 4 patients had died and that their deaths can be directly attributed to the strike. Last week, strikers blocked access to various hospitals, preventing patients from getting to them. Joe Fala said that the military was also helping to secure access to the hospitals.
In our health news today, at least 14.6 million people, representing 32.4% of the total population, still practice open defecation, according to the Ministry of Health official. According to Dr. Dana Atwine, the ministry's permanent secretary, the practice is in both urban and rural areas. Dr. Atwine called for collective efforts for all ministries, departments and agencies and non-government organizations, leaders and citizens to be responsible for their health in order to reduce the burden of preventable diseases on the healthcare system. While officiating at the launch of the Sanitation Week in Kampala, Dr. Atwine said that despite government's interventions on sanitation and hygiene, Uganda continues to grapple with water and sanitation challenges, with 23% and 9.4% of the population still practicing open defecation in rural and urban areas, respectively. She added that 36% of communities in the country have basic sanitation facilities, 24% of which are in rural areas, and 47.9% are in urban areas, while hand washing in rural areas is at 35.8% and 53.8% for urban. Dr. Atwine also expressed concern over the continued poor food hygiene and safety practices, such as selling food from unclean premises, food preparation over open drainage lines, indiscriminate disposal of waste and poor housing. She noted that poor sanitation is linked to transmission of diseases such as cholera, dysentery, hepatitis A and E, typhoid and polio, and exacerbates stunting among children. In our sports news today, Ashley Mulman-Pasio, pro cyclist and a sports champion, is collaborating with Culture Cycles in Kayelisha to improve the lives of teen girls in the area. Let's take a look.
The team completed their first Cape Town cycle tour as part of 30,000 cyclists who circled the Picturesque Peninsula. Some of the team members were unable to cycle a year ago. Culture Cycles is an initiative led by Sindil and Juma, an all-girls cycling team that trains cyclists and provides a space for them to study and network. After tagging Ashley in a tweet, in an initiative was born between Culture Cycles and Rokokabo Collective. According to Mulman-Pasio, the aim is to empower the girls through the bicycle. Mulman-Pasio rode her first tour as a teenager because she was following in her mom's footsteps, and her victory in 2012 in the very early stages of her career gave her the belief that the life of a professional cyclist was a reality.
That was the news. Thank you for always keeping it TV Africa. Please do stay tuned.